Something extraordinary has just happened, and the vast majority of people don't yet understand how dramatically the world has shifted. For the first time in years, President Trump didn't hint, suggest, or tease an upcoming move. He didn't float an idea through advisors. He didn't send out a cryptic late-night message. Instead, he issued a direct, unmistakable order with immediate operational weight. The airspace surrounding Venezuela, he declared, is now closed, fully, immediately, and without exception. And when a sitting U.S. president uses that kind of language, we're no longer in the realm of symbolism. We're in the realm of action. Orders of that nature signal that assets are already deployed, missions are already aligning, and decisions have already been made at the highest levels. For many Americans, the natural question becomes, why Venezuela? Why now? And why in such a dramatic, high-stakes manner? After all, presidents have rattled sabers before. They've made threats, issued statements, and released strong rhetoric. But closing the airspace of an entire nation? That's not rhetoric. That's a strategic shift. This action forces us to examine what's really happening behind the scenes, what it means not only for Venezuela or Latin America, but for American families, U.S. security, global geopolitics, and the future shape of power in the Western Hemisphere. Let's start with the announcement itself. On Truth Social, Trump posted a message aimed not just at airlines and pilots, but also at drug traffickers and human smugglers who use Venezuelan routes. The language was blunt and unusually firm. Consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. To many, it may read like just another presidential statement. But anyone with experience in military, aviation, or strategic operations knows what this signals. A declaration like this is not advisory. It is a claim of control. Control backed by operational capability and readiness to enforce it. You cannot simply declare an airspace closed and hope global actors comply. To enforce it, you need layered radar coverage. You need fighter jets on station. You need surveillance aircraft monitoring every movement. You need tankers in the sky keeping those aircraft fueled. And you need command and control systems active, likely onboard ships or forward-deployed bases. Most importantly, you need the political will to respond if someone tests your boundary. Because once you declare airspace closed, any unauthorized aircraft becomes a challenge to your authority, and the U.S. cannot afford to back down from its own red lines. And here's the key point. The United States is not bluffing. We know this because one of the most powerful symbols of American military might, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, is already positioned in the Caribbean. This is not a casual deployment. A carrier strike group is a floating arsenal, an entire city of power projection. The Ford carries up to 80 aircraft. It travels with missile cruisers, guided destroyers, submarines, and logistic ships. When a fleet like this moves into a region, the message is unmistakable. The U.S. is preparing for multiple scenarios, and it intends to be ready for all of them. So again, why should Americans care? Because this action connects directly to the largest public health and security threat currently hitting American communities, the drug crisis. For years, Venezuela has acted as a superhighway for narcotics, what Trump euphemistically calls candies. These substances, produced in Colombia and funneled through Venezuela, are responsible for hundreds of thousands of American deaths. Analysts estimate hundreds of tons of narcotics pass through Venezuela each year, with much of it ending up on U.S. soil. The Venezuelan regime, led by Nicolas Maduro, is not merely tolerating this, it is participating in it. Top officials have been directly tied to cartel networks. Venezuela has become a true narco state, where military officers collaborate with traffickers and profit from the trade. The numbers are staggering. In the past 2 decades, drug overdoses have taken more American lives than were lost in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam combined. These are not distant statistics. These are sons, daughters, parents, friends. Communities across the nation are being hollowed out. Trump has repeatedly claimed that the U.S. has already stopped 85% of maritime drug trafficking, and evidence supports a massive uptick in Coast Guard and Navy interdictions across the Caribbean. But whenever one pipeline is shut down, cartels adapt. They move to land routes, hidden landing strips, small aircraft, and jungle corridors. That's where Trump's comment becomes critical. We'll be stopping them by land also. Stopping trafficking by land is vastly more complicated than intercepting boats at sea. Maritime operations take place in clear legal zones. International waters are designated U.S. territories, but land operations? Those could involve striking facilities inside another country. That is no longer interdiction. That is incursion, and on the world stage, it carries the weight of an act of war. According to major reports, the Pentagon has already presented Trump with operational options. These include striking cartel-controlled drug labs, storage depots, and possibly Venezuelan military units that assist in narcotics trafficking. Some of these targets reportedly connect directly to Maduro's inner circle. This raises natural fears among Americans, who remember Iraq and Afghanistan, lengthy conflicts, with no clear endpoint. But strategic analysts point out several differences. The geography is closer, the objectives are narrower, and the mission would be directed at disrupting criminal networks, not restructuring an entire nation. But the story doesn't end with drugs. Venezuela is deeply intertwined with China, Russia, and Iran. Over the past 2 decades, China has invested billions into Venezuelan infrastructure and oil, gaining a critical foothold in America's backyard. Russia has sent advisors, equipment, and even established intelligence facilities. For those who recall Cold War history, this pattern echoes the Cuban Missile Crisis, a foreign power attempting to set up strategic capabilities within striking distance of U.S. shores. The U.S. drew a red line then, and it appears to be drawing one again. This is where the so-called hemispheric defense strategy comes into play. This policy represents a major shift in U.S. geopolitical priorities. Instead of pouring resources into distant conflicts, the focus pivots toward the Western Hemisphere, North, Central, and South America. The idea is simple: secure our neighborhood, strengthen regional partners, crack down on cross-border smuggling, push hostile foreign powers out of the hemisphere, and ensure America's security begins close to home, rather than halfway across the world. In recent years, countries like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and parts of Central America have become fragile, corrupt, and susceptible to foreign influence. While the U.S. was distracted by wars in the Middle East, competitors quietly stepped in. The hemispheric strategy aims to reverse that trend. And by closing Venezuelan airspace, Trump signals the beginning of a new doctrine, one that asserts American control, denies adversaries strategic space, and directly targets criminal networks that threaten U.S. citizens. Whether this leads to limited airstrikes, expanded interdiction operations, or broader regional realignment remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: America has entered a new phase of geopolitical posture, and the stakes are enormous. The strain on communities is real, and it's becoming harder for everyday Americans to ignore. Local systems that were already stretched thin are now pushed to their limits. Schools, hospitals, and social programs are absorbing pressures they were never designed for, forcing towns and cities to confront challenges they can barely manage. But while the pressure is undeniable, there's another risk that shadows every decision: the danger of overreach. When emotions rise and problems escalate, governments sometimes react too forcefully. That kind of reaction can sweep up innocent people alongside the guilty, creating new victims while trying to confront the problem. And beyond the legal consequences lies something even weightier: the moral responsibility. Turning away people who are in genuine need, or punishing those who have done nothing wrong, is a decision that carries long-term consequences for any nation that claims to value fairness and justice. This is where history becomes an important teacher. Because as intense as today's challenges feel, America has been here before. The early 20th century saw waves of immigration met with suspicion and panic. The mid-century brought fears of espionage and internal threats. Each moment followed a familiar pattern of fear, reaction, and hindsight. In those historical moments, the nation struggled to balance compassion with security, a tension that continues today. Laws were passed, communities were reshaped, and debates raged about who belonged, who didn't, and who got to decide. Now, another chapter is being written. Federal investigators are raising alarms that suggest something bigger is forming. Beneath the surface, something more organized, more coordinated, and far more troubling than many had expected. This warning didn't come out of nowhere. It emerged from a sprawling investigation in Minnesota that exposed a level of fraud few imagined possible. What began as a local issue has grown into a national concern, shaking public trust in a system meant to help vulnerable people. Investigators now believe that Minnesota may just be the beginning. They see signs, patterns, financial trails, familiar tactics that point to similar fraud rings operating quietly in other states. These networks, according to federal agents, share more than ideology or origin. They exploit the same weaknesses in federal programs: They take advantage of oversight gaps that are supposed to protect taxpayer money, and they do it with a level of sophistication that suggests training, coordination, and long-term planning. The rings appear to mirror one another in structure and execution. When one loophole is found, the next group uses it. When one method proves successful, it spreads. These are not isolated criminals. They're systems designed to exploit systems. But the fraud itself is only part of the story. The political reaction around it has taken an unexpected and increasingly dangerous turn. In a recent public statement, one political figure made a deeply alarming implication that enforcing immigration law is equivalent to declaring war. She suggested that violent responses should be seen not as crimes, but as understandable reactions to government policy. That kind of language crosses the line from political disagreement into ideological extremism. It transforms debate into justification. It signals that violence is no longer unthinkable. It is, in her framing, almost expected. And that is precisely the kind of rhetoric investigators say fuels radicalization. It emboldens those who believe they are fighting an unjust system. It encourages people to see violence not as a last resort, but as a moral duty. Service members, border agents, and law enforcement officers feel the impact of this rhetoric directly. They are the ones on the ground, implementing policies, carrying out orders, and protecting communities. Yet they are increasingly treated as symbols rather than human beings. Many have reported harassment, threats, and targeted hostility, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. The idea that attacking service members could be understandable is a dangerous shift in public discourse. It creates a climate in which extremists feel validated. And when extremists feel validated, they begin to act without fear of moral or social consequence. Federal investigators warn that this environment makes their work harder. It blurs the lines between legitimate criticism and dangerous incitement. It provides cover for organized crime groups that thrive in chaos and confusion. These groups, investigators say, are opportunistic. When political leaders cast doubt on law enforcement, criminals find more room to maneuver. When communities turn against authorities, criminals step in to fill the vacuum. The combination of radical rhetoric and organized criminal activity creates a perfect storm, one that is harder to contain once it begins to spread. Meanwhile, millions of immigrants who follow the rules, work hard, and contribute to society find themselves caught in the middle of this escalating conflict. They bear the consequences of fraud they never committed and of rhetoric they never endorsed. They face suspicion in their workplaces, tension in their communities, and fear about what future policies might bring. They are often the first to feel the ripple effects of political conflict, even though they are the least responsible for causing it. At the same time, citizens who are frustrated with the current system feel equally unheard. They want accountability, clarity, and protection. They want assurance that the people responsible for exploitation will face consequences. But as investigators warn, the real danger is not just the fraud rings or the political extremism. It's the combination of both. When illegal activity intersects with irresponsible rhetoric, the result can destabilize communities far beyond the original problem. America has faced moments like this before, and each time, the country has been forced to decide, will fear push us toward division and reaction, or will reason guide us toward solutions that protect security without abandoning humanity? That decision once again lies ahead, and the consequences will shape not just policy, but the nation's identity for years to come.